Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Are Your Work Processes AI Ready? Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. My name is Valerie, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs that CCAPS offers, the college's contact information will be on the last slide of our presentation. I am delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar. Are your work processes AI ready? AI tools are everywhere, but not every process is ready for AI. Many organizations rush to adopt AI without first understanding whether their workflows are structured, measurable, or stable enough to benefit from AI. The result? Wasted time, inconsistent outputs, and failed initiatives. This webinar is designed for professionals who wish to move beyond experimentation and begin applying AI in a more structured, effective way within their organization. We will explore the characteristics of processes that are strong candidates for AI, common warning signs that indicate a process is not ready, and how to think more strategically about where AI can create real operational value. During the session, we will identify the key characteristics of processes that are well suited for AI integration, assess whether an organization's current workflow is AI ready or requires further refinement, and finally, recognize common risks and pitfalls of applying AI to unstructured or poorly defined processes. It is our pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Valerie Lockhart. Valerie is a digital strategist, educator, and communications expert with more than a decade of experience helping a wide range of organizations and entrepreneurs tell their stories online. As a specialist in accessible and audience-focused content, Val is passionate about empowering others to communicate with clarity, confidence, and impact. Val, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your wisdom on this very important topic. I'll pass it on to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's something that has been coming up a lot lately. Over the last couple of years, we're hearing a lot about different AI tools and agents and automation. But what we're hearing far less is whether the work that we're looking to automate is actually ready. So today, I'm hoping that we can challenge a little bit of those assumptions that AI is really a technology problem and realize that it's more often a process problem. So hopefully today will be helpful. You'll get some tools and frameworks that you can use to evaluate your own workflows and decide whether you're actually ready for automation. So to kick us off, I want to start with kind of a true story that is repeating itself pretty regularly in organizations across the country. An organization, business or nonprofit, doesn't matter. Everybody is feeling this urge to automate and implement AI. So a lot of them who are jumping early have spent 6 months, looking at tools and figuring out how to implement this new AI solution for their business or their organization. They've invested thousands of dollars. They have, gotten people trained. Leadership is excited. They go to launch this thing and pretty quickly it just falls flat and no one has adopted it. Nobody's using it. Most of the time, people are really quick to blame the technology. So maybe the AI wasn't smart enough. The vendor oversold us on this product. Our employees are just resistant. Like all of these things are excuses that we hear a lot when this implementation of AI fails. But in many cases, the real problem is actually that the AI didn't fail. It's just that they had a pretty crappy process to start with. And so, what is happening is these organizations are attempting to automate confusion that already exists. And when they implement this AI, people kind of give up on it and just resort to the way that they've always done things because it works, right? So this is what we're talking about today, and kind of eliminating the unnecessary time and money investments in processes that can't or shouldn't withstand automation. So I would love in the chat if you would just throw. I just want to get a general idea from who's here in the room with us today about which of these statements best describes where your organization is at. So you have no AI strategy, you're experimenting, you have a few AI workflows maybe already in production, but not across the organization, or your company is amazing, you've had well-documented processes, and you are AI integrated across all of your operations. So I'm going to take a look. It's going fast, but it looks like lots of experimenting, few workflows, experimenting. I see a couple of daily ops, which is awesome. No AI, yeah. So it looks, just from glancing, it looks like overwhelming. We're kind of in the experimentation phase, which is what I'm seeing across every industry that I'm working with or talking to. A common thing that we're also seeing is that AI is being used a lot in organizations, but not in any kind of concerted or regulated way. Different departments are using it for different things. There's no real policies in place. Everyone's kind of experimenting on their own. And so we won't get into this today, but there's a lot of cybersecurity and other issues that arise with that kind of implementation. But that's, like I said, for a whole different webinar. So the thinking behind why some of these things fail is because people tend to think that a process that is in place, if you just add AI to it, you're going to get better results. Sometimes that can be true, but I would say it's rare. The reality is that a broken process plus AI results in a faster broken process. So you're going to break things faster, but it's still broken. It doesn't automatically just improve your workflow. It accelerates whatever already exists. So if you've ever been sitting in a meeting that should have been an email, that like using AI to generate summaries of those meetings doesn't make that meeting better. It doesn't make that meeting where it shouldn't have just been an email. It doesn't fix the problem. It just scales the problem. So as we're thinking about, examples where these are cases we don't want to scale, like if there are things, reports that nobody's reading, why would we want to automate that? Like if it's not having impact already, don't make it faster. Don't make it repeatable. Don't make it, automated. In my mind, there are 3 stages of kind of where a process can be of AI maturity. So it's kind of a journey. Our first stage is kind of what I was talking about. Like it's chaos, right? Like everybody's kind of doing their own thing. They have their own way of doing things. If you asked 3 different employees in your organization how this task gets completed, you'll likely get 3 different answers. This is where I would say a lot of people that I talk to are in this area when it comes to AI maturity at their organization. Stage 2 is where you start to have repeatability. So you have some standards in place. Some of your departments may have really good documentation on their processes, and so they've been able to take those repeatable processes and implement AI in a way that is working. It's it's showing up, it's having an impact, it's doing the thing that you want it to do. This is where, we're starting to see some companies creep into. We have some classes at the U that go into this and how to get to that stage. But ultimately, where we want to go is that we are in the optimization phase where, it's across the organization. Departments are implementing workflows that actually have good impact in work. And then we're optimizing things so that we're measuring and improving and refining those workflows to get to that. That's where it's really powerful. So from your answers, I'm imagining that most of your organizations are probably lying somewhere between chaos and repeatability. Sounds like there are a couple, though, which is really cool, that are moving toward or already in that kind of optimization phase. So I think hopefully after today, you'll have some better ideas of how to evaluate some of these things and see how you can move the needle on some of your workflows. So in order for a workflow or a process to be AI ready, in my mind, when I evaluate whether it is, I look for 5 different characteristics. So the first question is it repeatable? Like, is it something that we're doing over and over and over again? Is it well documented? Is it measurable? Is it stable? So there's not a lot of chaos in the system. And then, is it high volume enough to be worth it? You'll notice that of these 5 things, nowhere on here does it say that it uses AI, because that's not really where we're at right now. We're evaluating the readiness, not the automation. So we need to make sure that the manual process is worked out first, so then we can decide where the automation comes, where we need to keep humans in that process to double check things and really start to build out a good process that can be well automated. This is I'll call it a readiness scorecard. If you go through, think about one of the processes that you are regularly performing. It could be onboarding, it could be some monthly reporting that you have to do for your department. It could be marketing content, customer support. Kind of think about whatever that process is and go through these 6 questions. Yes or no? Is the process already documented? Is it repeated regularly? Is the success of that process measurable? Is the data accessible? Do you know what the data that goes into it is? Are multiple people performing it? And then, does it consume significant time? If you get 5 or 6 of these as a yes, I think you're definitely in the space where it's a good candidate. 3 to 4, you kind of can start identifying some of the things where you might want to refine or do better documentation, figure out, talk to the 8 different people that are doing it different ways and kind of figure out where those consistencies are and how you can streamline things. And if it's 0 to 2, it's definitely not ready and should probably be reevaluated. Move on to something else. One of the reasons that, or one of the components I'll say that you should kind of focus on is the consistency and the volume of the process that you're trying to automate. Obviously, not all work deserves automation. The sweet spot is really things that are high volume and high consistency. So this matrix can help kind of thinking through some of these things and figuring out, if it's something we're doing a lot of, but not very often, maybe, or if it's not very consistent, you fix your process first. If it's already high volume and high consistency, that's your top candidate. I would say, if it's something that's going to have good ROI. So if it's something that you haven't or you don't do very often, or it just doesn't come up a lot, those are going to go to the bottom of the list of processes that you would, those can be back burner things for automation. So when I'm thinking through this, like employee onboarding, if your process is really strong in that, that might be where you want to start some automation process. I will say though, my warning is make sure that when it comes to very strategic and important decision making, you're not leaving that up to the AI. There is some department head or some person in that loop to make those decisions and make sure that the automation is not inadvertently leaving someone out of the process or using data in a way that is problematic. That's just a caveat I have on all AI use, no matter what your use case is. So when people talk about hallucinations, they often treat them as purely technical failures, like the AI just failed because it hallucinated. But a lot of times those hallucinations happen because the failure is actually at the process level. It's either there's some bad data that was included, there's inconsistent decision making, there's some kind of undefined quality standards that we haven't thought through. The reason for this is that AI often exposes the weaknesses that were already there. And so if you're already having some bad customer experiences, if there are, stuff that time is being wasted on reports that don't really have any impact or any adoption from people, scaling those makes really no sense. AI doesn't really create dysfunction, but it will reveal dysfunction in things that are already withstanding. So this is the importance of kind of working through those things beforehand to decide what actually makes sense. So in the organizations that I've worked with, most of I would say the best process candidates tend to be in these kind of 4 areas right now. So generating FAQ responses, triaging emails, categorizing things, screening resumes, creating job descriptions that then get checked by someone else, creating onboarding materials from existing data, repurposing content, so not really writing it the first time, but maybe changing something if you have content from one area that needs to be changed to an internal document or vice versa, drafting things, doing SEO analysis, and then for operations, it's the reporting or the summarization and classifying those documents. So all of these things there's a pattern within them because they are repeatable, they're pretty predictable, and they're high volume. They're things that we're doing a lot of in our organizations. So they're not necessarily replacing people, but they're removing the repetitive effort that we have to go through for some of these things. So these make them good candidates because they're repeatable and they're happening a lot at a scale. Some of the red flags or warnings, I'll say, is that every employee is doing it differently. There's no consistency. A couple of the organizations that I've worked with, they had, they had leadership change. And so rules were kind of constantly changing and nothing was stable enough because a new leader would come into the department and they would, want things done a certain way, but that contradicted how they used to do it. And so there was just too much flux to have anything be really stable, a stable foundation to be built on. When no one can agree on what the success metrics are is a bad process to start trying to automate because it'll just be chaotic. And then again, where the outcomes are really heavily dependent on human judgment, I tend to shy away from those because of the risk associated with the automation of those processes. Um, if if any of these things are happening, if you see these red flags in your processes, it doesn't mean that you can't automate them. It just means that there's a lot more work that needs to be done before you get to that point. Um, it's not an AI problem, it's a process problem that needs to be worked through. And I will say one of the most common uh, red flags uh, red flags that I see in organizations are what I'm calling the tribal knowledge problem. So everybody has run across this, I'm sure. But if you ask, who knows how this process works? And the answer is always, we'll just ask Jane because Jane's done it. She's the one. This is not a process, that's a dependency. So the question is, what happens when Jane leaves? And how do we get the process out of Jane's head and into actual documentation that people can use and repeat and build systems on? So this bottleneck happens in so many organizations where somebody's been there for years, they've been the delegated one to just do this thing, and no one else knows how it works, but everyone relies on that to happen in order for their things, the ripple effect of those things. So anywhere that you can identify this bottleneck or the tribal knowledge being stuck in one or two person's heads, that is where we need to extract, document, pull out, look at how things are or could be done better, and then have the automation discussion. Because that is where process work becomes organizational work. So the frequency, or AI frequently uncovers problems that have existed for years. When you just rush to automate something without kind of thinking through that step by step, like identifying the algorithm of it, it will break down. If there's unclear ownership, a lot of times it comes down to poor communication. So sometimes it'll be that one person who has all this information trapped in their head. And then they leave and no one has any context. So it's the communication pieces of that need to be really worked out. Again, no documentation or the conflicting priorities. The AI tends to make those things really visible, and it gets messy really quickly. In my classes, a lot of the time I talk to my students about the movie Fantasia, when Mickey, as the wizard, automates the brooms to bring the water up the tower, and because makes life easier, right? But then chaos ensues because it's flooding everything. These are things that when we automate, they can get out of control very quickly. And so if there are any of these red flags or things that aren't kind of worked out first, it can be chaos. So that is the general gist of today, is just to make sure that we're not losing sight of the systems thinking that needs to happen as we're working within our organizations. So a lot of times, people want to start at the top. Oh, we got to automate. That's the first thing. Actually, it's the last thing. So you have to start with that process definition. You've defined the process, you measure it, you optimize it, and then you automate it. Automation should always be the reward for process maturity. If there are things that are still in testing mode, if there are things that aren't repeating or repeatable, it can't move up the scale. It needs to be ready. So this is one of the most important slides that I will hopefully leave you with. I think it's really important that in everything that we're doing, particularly as it relates to AI, we're always asking, where do the humans live within this process? I know there's a lot of push for, agentic AI that just does everything, and it keeps, no human has to touch it and it's just running and it's great. I am more skeptical of that personally. Um, I I believe that we need to have checks and balances in place, and humans living within our processes to make sure that these problems aren't scaling, and that biases aren't getting through, and that things are actually um, working correctly. So uh, you know, as you're thinking through and documenting your workflow, like we have here, you can color code it like we have here. So, there are certain steps in this process that are good candidates for automation. They're repeatable, they're data driven, they can be automated easily. But then you have a human that steps in and kind of reviews things. This is where that human judgment comes in, and the accountability piece. A lot of the platforms, the AI platforms, when you bring them into your organization, when you adopt them into your processes, you're not like the accountability of that and the outcomes from that do not stay with the process. Like they don't transfer to the platform. Uh, they are yours. Like, as the organization, as the owner or the leader of that organization, you are ultimately responsible for the outcomes of that process and that data. Um, a lot of some of the people I've talked to said, well, if it's a hallucination that causes this, like that's just OpenAI's problem, or that's ChatGPT's problem, or that's Gemini's problem, but it's really not. It is your problem. It's your organization's problem. So keep that human in the loop. Keep that human there to double check things. If there is anything that requires strategic judgment, like high level decisions, communications that are stakeholder considerations, like that, if that exists in the process, that is like the number one indicator that there needs to be human. Uh, Quick example: a sales organization, sales department was trying to automate their quote system. Uh, they thought they had all the pricing in place. They thought they had this worked through this workflow really well. So they went to automate it, and there was a little bit of bad data in their set that had been discounted for some reason or another. Some client had received some hefty discount, but that data was left in the pricing. And so when they went to automate the process, it was pulling some of this information that wasn't, it was an anomaly, right, in the data. But that shifted what the automation was quoting. And so because they didn't decide to have a human check these things before they went out, a bunch of their customers were starting to get quotes that were undervaluing the actual, undercutting the cost of the actual process or the actual service. So it's just a good example of, you might have everything in place and the automation might work, but is it really always having the right output? You can get things pretty consistent, and you can, maybe you don't have to check every one that goes out, but having a regular check on those things to make sure that you're not, losing money is always a good idea. And ultimately, for every organization, I think the goal should not be about removing humans, but it should be about putting humans in the places where they add the most value and where we have the most impact and have the most strategic placement for us, because we need to keep that. So the thing that I would say before you ever look at another tool, another AI tool, is just ask yourself these questions. So before you spend any money, like identify these things. What problem are we actually solving? How are we solving that problem today? Because it is being solved. It might be 8 different people in 8 different departments doing 8 different things, but know what those are. Know what the process is. How much time does it consume? Because that's going to play right into our ROI. And most importantly, to my mind, is like, what happens if the AI fails? So, what does success look like? And what happens if the AI fails? So, in our quote system example, the AI kind of failed because it was undervaluing and undercutting our cost of goods. Uh, that scales poorly. That's not going to result in good outcomes for the organization. So, being able to answer what happens if the AI fails and how do you remedy that is probably the most important question in this cycle. Um, and if you can't answer these questions, do not do not pull the trigger on implementation or buying someone's, you know, fancy new AI tool that is going to solve all of your world problems, because it won't. A and B, you got to have your stuff together and you got to have things in place to make sure that you are able to implement well. This is another point where not every process deserves automation. So there is a cost to automation, whether it is the cost of the AI system or the AI platform that you're using. There is the time consumed trying to get these things in place and trying to set them up. There's training that's involved. There's the maintenance of them, and this is across any process, right? Any actual process that you're trying to automate. You know, how I broke it down here is you have to look at the time saved, the frequency, and the implementation effort. If something can save you 5 minutes multiple times a week, it's probably worth automating. If it's something that might save you more time, but it only happens once a month and it, takes all this time, I think it's something that would be really just not worth the effort. So it's a rough estimate, but your time saved and the frequency versus the effort. If it's just going to take too much, it's probably not worth doing it all. So the best candidates for processes will save you meaningful time, and they will occur frequently, and there will be low cost to adoption. So you're not going to have to spend a ton of time, training people in different processes. Start with the low hanging fruit that you can get quickly, that gives you good ROI, and then you can start working on the next pieces. And I do see in the chat that we have some questions. So we're getting, this is my last slide. So we will jump into some Q&A because I know that's the most important part. So as we're thinking about all this stuff, if you remember nothing else from what we've talked about today, just know that AI amplifies whatever your existing processes are. Not every workflow needs to be automated. Documentation. That's the most important. Make sure that you know how things are working, how they are impactful, how they are measured. And then having those stable and measurable processes those are the ones that are going to generate the most and the highest return on investment. AI strategy, the best AI strategy, often starts with process improvement. So the question to kind of lead with for all of this is not, can AI do this, but can a human do this consistently? that's the place where automation is the most valuable. So thank you. Oh, I don't want to go to that one. I hope this has given you a little bit of food for thought. I think we can share the slides afterwards so you can look at the matrix if you need that, or any of the processes that you can go through to kind of evaluate what processes could be automated. I am always available, to talk through these things. I love having these conversations with people. And I'd love to answer any specific questions that we have now. And I think we have about 15 minutes left. So if you have some specifics we want to dig into, or anything you want to chat about, I'm super open to that. So I will stop sharing for right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Yeah.
Wow. A lot of
Oh, wait.
great information. And I'm definitely in the experimentation phase, and I am not Jane in our tribe for sure. So now, as Val said, we will move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. But before we do, we have a short 2-question poll regarding today's webinar. So this poll will appear on the screen for you to complete. We really appreciate your feedback as it helps to continue improving both our webinar topics and the production of those webinars. Please use the QR code on this slide to access the full survey and share any suggestions for future webinar production. So there is a longer survey that you can complete. Won't take you long. But the QR code for the shorter survey is on the slide. Courtney has added a link to the full survey in the chat. You can find it at z.umn.edu/UM webinar survey. So I'm going to pause for just a moment to have you complete the survey, and thank you so much for your feedback. All right. So yes, we have about 15 minutes for questions, Val.
Okay.
And before I start into those, there has been so much positive feedback on your presentation. Learning a lot, great presentation. So thank you so much again. I am going to try to get through as many questions as I can. I apologize in advance if we do not get to your question. And I'm just going to skim through these to try to recap a couple of them that seem similar. So a couple of questions have come up around resume reviewing.
Okay.
So one listener said if outcomes depend heavily on human judgment, so that's something they heard in the webinar.
Yep.
Why do many organizations allow AI to review resumes? And then a related question, how can AI effectively screen resumes when there can be so much nuance in transferable skills?
Yeah. Super, super good questions. And one of the AI use cases that I feel so many different ways about. So I've looked at this from lots of different avenues because I used to be in HR, and I also have helped people optimize their resumes and those kind of things. So looking at it from both perspectives, I can see why automating that process of recruiters are inundated. You have one job opening and there's 300 applicants for that one job. That's pretty average. So just getting through that volume of noise of all of those resumes, and typically it's one person who's in charge of going through those resumes. Having some kind of automation in that process is very needed to just get through the volume of it. That said, that process of automation is inadvertently always going to leave someone that is super qualified out of the equation. So it's kind of a balance between how do we do it well enough that we're not losing people, and like still keeping the process, quick. So how it works right now is they're using AI to kind of match for keywords in your resume. So if there are things that a hiring manager has put up as the criteria that they need for that role, if your resume hits those keywords, you get kind of pushed through to the next level of review. A lot of times, we're not taking enough time on the job searcher side to like customize our resume or customize our cover letters to use the language that the recruiters are using in order to get through that first level barrier. So we might be talking about what we've done in a way that doesn't match the words or the content that they have set up as the criteria. So the first thing I would say from a job seeker perspective is try to match that language. That is one way that you can use AI, is to help you take your experience and reformat it or review it to match the language that they're looking for. Not that you're making things up about what you've done, but just the way you're talking about it to get through and like match the keywords and the things that they're actually filtering for. It's one little way. The other thing that I would say from the HR side is that we can't just kind of set it and forget it. We have to do some double checks on like looking at the actual resumes and making sure that, we're not missing people in that. One quick example I'll give you, and then we can move on to a new one. But there was a gentleman who had a disability, and he had some facial tics, I'll say. And there's a very new process going into place in some of these hiring places where they will use AI video to screen applicants. So you're not actually talking to a person, you're like recording an interview. And then if that interview does, there's things that they will look for in the video that will either bring you to the next level of recruitment or knock you out. And because of his disability, the AI video robot thought that he was like evasive or like didn't look trustworthy because he had a physical tick in his face. And so this is one example of how a like super qualified person doesn't get through the AI screening because the robots thought it was, distrust or like he's lying about something because of his facial features not matching exactly what they should have been. So these are the kind of nuances that we have to keep in mind, and why these human in the loop are so important, is because the AI will only do what we train it to do and what we tell it to do, and sometimes that's going to inadvertently have problems. So not a probably good answer, but hopefully a little more enlightening as to like how to navigate that a little bit better.
Great. Val, another question here. What is your best advice if you're the Jane in your
Oh,
tribal knowledge slide scenario?
okay. If you are Jane, you need to, and you want to use AI, there's a tool called Scribe. It's an AI tool that automatically you start it and you go through and you do your whatever the process is, you do that process and it automatically documents every single keystroke, every click, everything that you're doing in the process, and it creates really good documentation. So if you don't want to use AI, sit down and write out every single thing, even if it's like, I look at this and I decide this or that. Like every single step of your process needs to get documented. So a couple different ways you can do it, but the most important thing is just document everything. Make sure that you have documentation. It should be clear enough and like screenshots and visual aids of someone should be able to pick up that documentation and walk through that process without question. So it's going to take a while to get there because a lot of stuff just lives in our head and we do things without even thinking about them half the time. But really, like, be mindful about sitting down and actually step by step documenting what you do. It's difficult but necessary. So.
Great. So this is kind of related to Jane. Can you provide guidance on how to slow people down who want to jump to automation before a process is ready?
Yeah, I think pointing out the places where the process breaks down is very helpful. Um, if there's a bottleneck, or if there is a point where, like, consistently someone has to step in and intervene in the process, those are the breaking points for AI. So when you are looking at, maybe you have a boss or someone who's looking really gung ho about automating everything, if you can kind of do what I said, be Jane, and do the step by step, write down this is the process, and kind of highlight those areas in the process where you, as Jane, are having to make those strategic decisions, having to weigh things, like looking at prior knowledge and relying on things that the AI might not have access to. If you can identify those parts and point out to them, like, we need to solve for these things before automation is going to work, I think that's a good way to kind of put the brakes on and say, our process isn't quite ready. We need to work these things out before we can really successfully automate this. And being, not to be a fear monger, but just to say, like, these are the risks that there are if we don't get these things fixed, whether it's losing customers or sending out the wrong pricing, like whatever those, if you're talking to leadership specifically, anytime you can show them how it's going to hit the bottom line, that will be an effective way to tell them to put the brakes on. So,
Good point.
yes.
So, Val, the next question kind of takes us in a different direction.
Yeah.
One major issue with this topic is ethical concerns
Yeah.
regarding the use of AI, specifically environmental impacts, de-skilling, and intellectual rights,
Yeah.
worker rights.
Yeah.
Do you have practices that integrate or balance some of these concerns when establishing AI processes?
Yeah, I think all of those are legitimate concerns. And they are parts of the discussion that need to happen at your organization. So it's hard. I have to kind of speak in generalities because I don't know the specifics of what you're asking. But if there is a cost, so there's an environmental cost to using AI. We all kind of are aware of this. It is, I will say, it is getting better. So it's not that we're not addressing it. A lot of the data centers are changing the way that they're structured, so they're not using as much water. They are making changes to these things that are getting more, focusing more on conservation versus waste, right? But it is still a cost. And so if the thing that you are looking to automate, if the cost of that is too high, don't do it. Like, if don't just automate to automate. And a really simplified example that I can point out is, I think it was Sam Altman from OpenAI kind of came out publicly and said, please stop telling the AI thank you. Right? Like, that one prompt, it's not a huge prompt, right? But it's wasting some energy. It's wasting some environmental cost. It's wasting energy. It's wasting those things. And, like, it's not necessary to what you're trying to do. So looking at your processes and making sure that they are worthy of that investment is important. And so I can't answer it for your organization, but you have to weigh those things. When it comes to the bias and, like, the data and those kind of things, that's really where policies come into place for organizations. If you're dealing with people's private information, if you're, HIPAA compliant, if you are any of those things, there are going to be things that can't be in the system. There are things that are going to have to stay in that human judgment and like strategic part where it can't just be automated and let run. But yeah, it's so nuanced that there isn't an across the board cookie cutter answer for it, and every organization really has to weigh those things,
Mhm.
individually because they're real. They're real risks and real costs associated with it. So
Right. So we've received more than 30 questions. We're not going to get
okay.
through all 30 in the next like 7 minutes. So I'm going to probably have you answer two more, Val,
Yeah.
and then
Okay.
we need to wrap up. And I'll provide some next directions, next steps with questions that we did not get to.
Okay.
Um, when AI generates responses, are these digitally accessible for screen readers, or how can that be tested or programmed?
Okay. So the responses, like on the platform, I'm assuming they're asking about, like, um, yeah, that's kind of a weird question. So, like, let's say you're using the AI to create a slide or a document. Um, if it if it uses HTML, this is a whole accessibility like document lesson. But if it uses standard HTML as its output, so like you could take that HTML code, displays in the browser. If that is the output, it should be relatively easy for a screen reader to read it. If it is an image that's just like a PNG or a JPEG, uh, it will not be accessible to a screen reader unless you host it somewhere that lets you have alt text attached to it. So it depends on what tool you're using and it depends on how they come out. So um, one simple example, if you're having a AI tool create slides for you, like a slide deck, there are some AI tools that will create an image of the slide that you can't edit any of the text or any of the things on it. It comes out as an image. That would not be screen reader accessible. If you if the other tool spits out a slide that is optimized for like Google Slides, and you can edit the text to have like a title and an H1 header and a paragraph, like you can edit the text on it, those could be made screen reader accessible. So it just depends on the tool and it depends on what kind of output it is. So that's a whole nother webinar that we could do. But it's a good question and it's something to be totally cognizant of as you're making or creating these things with AI. You need to test and verify that they are in fact accessible to people. And I know like the U does a great job with that because everything that we're putting out like has to be and meet those standards. And so it's not just universities and state department, like it's everybody, every company is subject to these laws. And so you need to make sure that what you're putting out there is accessible. So that there's lots of resources if you need more help with that.
I made a note of that for another webinar. Okay, we're going to take a minute for one last question. Again, these are fantastic and really all over the board. In the ROI slide that you
Yeah,
used 20 hours for implementation as an example.
yeah.
The listener said, is this a typical amount of time that you use? Not sure how you quantify the ROI piece.
So I don't think there is a typical. So I think that was one example. It's so nuanced because, like, if you're just automating, like, there are tools right now where you can have the AI scrape your email and give you a summary of what has come in. That literally takes about 2 minutes to set up and could ultimately save you an hour every day
Mhm.
by having it summarizing what's come in the night before, right? So that would be a better ROI than something that you do once a month that it might save you 15 minutes. But in order to set that tool up, it's like you have to hire a developer, and now you have to have someone integrate that with 8 different pieces of your organization and like all of those people's time. So, like, when you start to think about the actual cost of that implementation, it needs to be worth it to do it. And so, if it's something that you can use Zapier and just, click a couple of buttons and the automation is set up and it's relatively low lift, that's a good candidate. Whereas if it needs to integrate with every department and all of these different databases, and like, there's a spectrum of time for that implementation. So it really just depends on what you're trying to do, but looking at the actual cost of that time is really important. And it's not just your time, it's how many other people have to get involved and all of their time. And what does that do to the rest of your department and the rest of your organization? So how much is it worth?
Great. Again, I want to apologize if we were unable to get to your question today. If this is the case for you and you would like to pass your questions along to Valerie, please feel free to send them to ccapsinfo@umn.edu. Courtney has put that address in the chat. Uh, Thank you so much, Valerie, for your time, your incredibly useful information and tools. It's been such a pleasure having you today,
Thank
and
you.
you have received so many kudos for this webinar. In addition to supporting individual students and learners, did you know that CCAPS offers flexible workforce development solutions designed to equip groups of employees with the targeted knowledge and skills that your organization needs? Our programs include industry-driven bachelor's and master's programs, as well as more than 18 non-credit certificates and more than 90 courses. If you or someone in your organization would like to learn more, please schedule a consultation with me, Beth Laurie, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss learning and development for your employee groups. You can reach me at ccapsworkdev@umn.edu, and Courtney will put that email address in the chat. Please also be sure to visit our website at ccaps.umn.edu/workforce development. And Courtney has also added that to the chat. As we come to the close, I want to thank everyone for joining and listening to today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, we will send everyone who registered a link to the webinar recording within a week of today's session. The recording will also be posted to our CCAPS webinar archive website, as well as our CCAPS YouTube page. University of Minnesota employees are also eligible to receive wellness points for listening to our webinars. To redeem your points, please complete the request form at z.umn.edu/CCAPS wellbeing. Courtney has put that in the chat. And points redemption applies to anyone who listened live today or to a recorded version. So if you have questions about the wellness program, the points process, your status, please email benefits@umn.edu. And we have one final slide, I believe. To reach out to the college, if you have any further questions, please email us at ccapsinfo@umn.edu or give us a call at 612-624-4000. Please be sure to visit our website for all of great information about CCAPS at ccaps.umn.edu. All of the college's contact information is provided you with here on this slide as well as in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Beth. It was great. Great seeing you today.